Montana Public Service Commission is now in session. The time is 9:30 a.m. The date is March the 3rd, 2020. We're in the Bollinger Room in the offices of the Montana Public Service Commission in Helena, Montana. All 5 commissioners are present in the room. Commissioner Koopman?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for recognizing me. One of our staff people was taken from the building this morning by EMTs, and I would like to just ask that we just have a moment of silence or silent prayer that this person can be well and back with us soon, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that, Mr. Commissioner Koopman. We now would ask that you all rise and join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You all move on now to public comment. Is there anyone who wishes to offer public comment before the commission today? Representative, welcome.
There we go. Good morning, Commissioner Johnson and members of the commission. Welcome back to Helena. And I know you've been doing your business around the state, and good for you. I just have a couple of things regarding the work session agenda coming up. The first one is, let's see, number 4. I look forward to hearing some discussion on initiating a legislative agenda to delete Montana Code annotated 69-3-401 through -405. Now, as I understand it, after talking to some folks, that's because there are really 2 tracks for public due process for challenges or complaints or input to a PSC order. The other track would be the Montana Administrative Procedure Act, which, as I understand, is standard practice for most state agencies, and that's typically the path that entities use. I just want to make sure, and as I know you do, that we still have due process, that the public still has due process in your cases as we move forward. And I know this is going to have to be taken to the legislature, but as you're looking at moving forward with this, perhaps the Title 69 needs to be tweaked rather than totally deleted, and I look forward to tracking that. The other issue, of course, is the protective order, number 5 on the agenda, protective order for Talon, similar to NorthWestern's request for protective order, which you took action on 2 weeks ago. My position still holds that I think we need to have an open book. The public, lawmakers, news media, journalists, should have access to all the information moving forward, especially on the case related to acquisition of Colstrip, further acquisition of Colstrip. So thank you for letting me speak my piece, and have a good meeting.
Thank you, Representative Dunwell. Always good to see you. Please come back. Is there further public comment before the commission? Seeing none, we will move on to agenda items, beginning with action items. And first would be approval of minutes from the previous meeting.
Move to approve.
There's a second. Been moved and seconded. We approve those minutes. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. And I think we will, without Ms. Hinman here, postpone that second action item, and we'll take that up at our next meeting. Moving on now to work session items, beginning with item number 1 in docket 2019.10.078, NorthWestern Energy. Ms. Arnold.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'm really high up right now. That's better. So on October 16th, 2019, NorthWestern Energy filed an application with the Public Service Commission to revise its Electric Tariff Rule No. 17, interconnection procedures for small generator facilities other than qualifying facilities. The revisions contained in this application allow customers with small generator facilities who submit an interconnection request that fails one or more of the Level 1 screens to still be approved under Level 1 review if the facility can be interconnected safely and reliably with no additional need for upgrades to NorthWestern's system. This allows some of the net metering customers who have systems up to 50 kW to connect under the Level 1 interconnection proceedings instead of having to go on to the Level 2, which is more costly. MREA submitted comments that were largely in favor of this application. They suggested one small language tweak to change the first word of the proposed language to if instead of when, so that it reads, if NorthWestern determines that the interconnection request fails one or more of the Level 1 screening criteria. And NorthWestern was agreeable to that change, as MREA indicates. Staff recommends that we approve the application with the suggested language change by MREA, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Is there a motion to that effect? Commissioner O'Donnell.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have studied this thoroughly, and it seems to me that the request of NorthWestern is very good all around to all parties, and I move that we adopt staff's recommendation.
Is there a second? Been moved and seconded. We adopt staff recommendation. Discussion of the motion. Commissioner O'Donnell?
No discussion, Mr. Chairman.
Is there further discussion of the motion? Hearing none, call the question on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Arnold. And work session item number 2 in 2019.12.104, Three Rivers Cooperative. Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. As you mentioned, this is docket 2019.12.104, Three Rivers request for conditional ETC relinquishment and a request for a study area waiver. Last week, staff distributed a memorandum to Commissioners that provided a full background and staff recommendations, so I'll keep this introduction very brief today, and staff will be available for any questions. Three Rivers Telephone Cooperative is an ETC in Montana that serves 28 exchanges, including the Browning Exchange on the Blackfeet Reservation. For the past several years, Three Rivers and a tribally owned telecommunications company called SciComm have been in negotiations for SciComm to purchase all assets that Three Rivers uses to serve the Browning Exchange so that SciComm may eventually take over the exchange and become the ETC that serves the area. The two parties have reached an agreement to transfer the assets, but in order for Three Rivers to relinquish its ETC designation for the exchange, there must already be an ETC that is ready to take over the area. So what Three Rivers is asking the Commission to do is to grant conditional approval of Three Rivers ETC relinquishment for the Browning Exchange, contingent upon SciComm obtaining ETC designation from the FCC. SciComm will be petitioning the FCC for ETC designation because they are a tribally owned entity and not subject to regulation by the Commission. The staff memorandum distributed last week specifies exactly what Three Rivers and SciComm are asking from the Commission in this docket. This request was noticed in public newspapers in the state, including the local newspaper in Browning, and no party requested intervention in the docket, and therefore staff is recommending the Commission approve all requests put forth by Three Rivers and SciComm in this matter, and staff is available for any questions.
I would move that we adopt staff recommendation in this docket pursuant to the staff memorandum. Is there a second? Been moved and seconded. Discussion of the motion. Vice Chairman Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike, you said that they would not, since they're a tribal entity, they would not be subject to any regulation from us. Does that include the annual application for that ETC regular designation?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Lake, yes, that is correct. We would not be recertifying them on an annual basis.
Okay. Then, Mike, Mr. Chairman, is there any active CAF2 funding population centers within the Browning district, the district that's involved?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Lake, yes. Right now, Three Rivers is receiving high-cost funds to support the area. Once this transaction is complete, their funding will be adjusted to exclude that Browning exchange, and SICOM expects to receive approximately $2 million per year through the high-cost fund to expand broadband service in the Browning exchange.
Okay. And just one last question on that. Are they on track right now? Three Rivers on track right now to have that completed within the time frame?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Lake, yes, Three Rivers is on track. They're in total compliance with the rules of the high-cost program.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Koopman.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mike, just following up with Commissioner Lake, and he and I were thinking along the same lines here. So how does to begin with, are there other tribally owned ETCs in Montana right now that you're aware of?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Koopman, not that I am aware of. This would be the first one, I believe, that exists in Montana. There probably are some other tribally owned entities across the country, but as far as I know in Montana, this would be the first one.
And in the case of SICOM, they would then go directly to the FCC for their ETC renewals each year or recertifications?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Koopman, yes, that's correct, they would.
And do you believe there would be any monitoring? Of course, we've been talking as a commission about a need to, at least on a spot check basis, since we're short of staff to really fully monitor all, 26 ETCs that we regulate. But would there be any of that in this case, since we wouldn't be involved in the ETC?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Koopman, no, the commission would not have any sort of regulation over SICOM because they are a tribally owned entity, a sovereign nation, and the commission would not have any regulation over SICOM.
And as far as you know, the FCC doesn't do any of that type of checking or monitoring?
No, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Koopman, the FCC would be the entity that regulates the tribally owned entity as SICOM. So the FCC would have some regulation jurisdiction over them, but the state commission would not.
Yeah, well, I understand that. I'm just, as a practical matter, would the FCC actually, in your view, be watching over and make sure that they continue to qualify from year to year, or would that, just, again, as a practical matter, would that probably not happen?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Koopman, I don't have any reason to believe that they would not exercise their jurisdiction over SICOM.
All right, thank you, Mike.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that I think that the recommendations, limited recommendations that the staff has made are really, really good. I just wanted to ask one thing. Is that we are required, as you point out in the memo, to ensure that all customers served by the relinquishing carrier will continue to be served and shall require sufficient notice to permit their purchase. And I have total confidence in this thing because both parties are in agreement, and I don't have any problem with that at all. But so if we pass this and relinquish this, that word ensure, that all customers receive, just what would happen procedurally if it didn't happen, if something fell apart? Would we be completely out of the picture?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner O'Donnell, well, I think that, well, first of all, we're not necessarily relinquishing their ETC designation today. The relinquishment is conditional upon SciComm successfully obtaining ETC designation from the FCC. So I think you can count on two things. The FCC will review their application and make sure they are able to serve the area. And number two, the fact that SciComm is purchasing all of the assets that Three Rivers already uses to serve the area can give you some comfort that the area would continue to be served appropriately.
Well, in particular, Commissioner Koopman has emphasized starting a long time ago, about that if we have the responsibility for ETC designation, we have some responsibilities for proper professional performance of that group, which is fine. Okay, I just wanted to be assured that when we sign off on this thing, after all the conditions are met, that we are completely out of the picture.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner O'Donnell, yes, we are.
Thank you. I just was concerned about the liability situation of the commission. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. Is there further discussion of the motion? Hearing none, call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries 4-1 with Commissioner Koopman dissenting. Moving on now to agenda item number 4, Commission-initiated revised Montana Code annotated. Mr. Rogala.
Good morning, Commissioners. The topic of this, or the theme of this work session, is Brussels sprouts, because they initially smell really funny and they look really odd, but once you have them, they're great. That's what we're doing here with the. Didn't deliver. That is an opinion. Okay. Okay. So, I'll share within 10 minutes of the agenda being published on the Commission's website. Our office's phones were lit up with a variety of reporters asking, what exactly is the Commission doing? Are you trying to limit judicial review of Commission actions? And that's just not what we're doing here. What we're doing is we're eliminating some outdated judicial review statutes, or we're seeking permission to work with the legislature to have these statutes removed because they're outdated, and more importantly, they've only been used to prevent effective review on the merits. There's one provision in Title 69 Judicial Review Procedures that requires the Commission to respond within 20 days after we get sued. That deadline does not exist in MAPA, and for that reason, in addition to the 69 procedures being outdated, we're requesting authority to begin working with the legislature on this item. The Commission should take comfort in the fact that the MAPA provisions are more robust and they are more streamlined for judicial review. And so I would submit that by having Title 69 procedures removed, that it actually helps facilitate judicial review procedures. Thank you, Chairman. Available for any questions.
Just to be clear, Mr. O'Galla, what you're looking for is approval to begin a legislative process. We are not talking about initiating a rule change within the Commission.
Correct, Chairman.
Just want to make sure. All right. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we follow staff's recommendation.
Is there a second? Second. Been moved and seconded. We adopt staff recommendation. Discussion of the motion, Vice Chairman Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. O'Galla, are we considering going to ETIC and having them carry this through their process? Because it will get entered earlier. It gets a higher position on the slate as they hear bills, and quite frankly, it should be something they will welcome us to come in with a solution rather than coming in with an additional problem.
Chairman Johnson, Vice Chair Lake, I defer to Robin Arnold, who's our head of public policy. So,
Mr.
Montana
Chairman,
Chief Lobbyist.
Vice Chair Lake, I think the idea is that we would be bringing this before ETIC. They have a March meeting, so the earlier we could bring this before them, the better, so they have time to actually discuss it. But the idea would be for them to carry a bill and to hopefully keep it as simple as possible.
Perfect. Thank you.
Is there further discussion of the motion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you both. All right, and moving on now to 2019.12.101 and .9.058 Northwestern Energy and Protective Orders. Mr. Rogala, looks like you're still up, huh?
thank you, Chairman. The title of this one is Norwegian Traditions. Some Norwegian traditions, like lefse, are great, taste good. Some, like lutefisk, are not, and you never want to be involved with them. We're here today because we need to correct some prior commission actions, and we're here to take commission actions on different protective orders. You'll remember that we granted a protective order for the Colstrip 1998 coal supply agreement. After we granted that protective order, it became clear that that contract was actually a public document, and by our rules, we are required to rescind that protective order. So staff is recommending we rescind that protective order. That is the lutefisk of this work session. There's a second protective order. You'll remember that we also granted protection to the 2020 coal supply agreement, and we acknowledged that we would scrutinize that agreement to determine what should be disclosed and what should be protected. That analysis is even more important now because there will be portions of the 98 coal supply agreement which will impact the 2020 agreement, which will require that to be released. So this will just require further diligence on this current protective order. Third, we have Talon Montana LLC's protective order requesting protection of 3 areas regarding its operations of CU4. 1 is its NERC GADS outage data. 2 is its 5-year budget and 10-year capital expenditure forecast. And then 3 is a small subset of the environmental remediation costs related to its 2012 administrative order on consent. Staff recommends that we protect all of the categories of information from Talon's protective order. We routinely protect the NERC GADS information, and that can be utilized to provide a variety of independent economic value to competitors. The second and third categories of information, though, give us pause in protecting, but we ultimately recommend that they deserve protection here. These 2 categories of information, I think, on their face, indicate independent economic value. They could provide valuable accounting and financial information for third-party generators or contractors that could be utilized against Talon, Montana. However, post-closing, NorthWestern Energy will have a 55% ownership stake in CU4. It will be the principal majority owner. So Talon, at that point, will become a third-party operator of NorthWestern's assets. That analysis for protective order purposes is much different than where we are today. So while today I think protection is granted, in the future it's a different analysis. So Chairman Johnson, I think unless there's folks want to take this one at a time, we could do an omnibus motion, but I defer to how you'd like to proceed.
Well, why don't we take the easy one first, and I'd entertain a motion to rescind the order protecting the 1998 coal contract.
So moved.
Is there a second? Been moved and seconded. Discussion of that motion. Hearing none, call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. All right. Does the commissioner wish to offer a motion with regard to staff recommendation on the remaining protective orders?
Mr. Chairman,
Vice
I would
Chairman
move
Lake.
that we follow staff's recommendation on the protective orders, as was with the last one. It will be in effect unless we find other information that causes us to rescind it. Okay.
Is there a second? Second. Been moved and seconded. We adopt staff recommendation with the understanding it would be subject to further review as elements of the situation develop. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I wanted to reiterate what I said before when this came up, is that I'm very appreciative of the staff to look with a finer magnifying glass at this to determine exactly which specific items deserve protection. As I say, it seemed to me, not from any specific language, but just the overall impression when I first read their request, that it was like a blanket protection order to sequester a lot of information that they wouldn't necessarily have protection for. I wanted to also say that I quite agree with Representative Dunwell, and have for a long time, that there are several parts in terms of Colstrip and the liability that ratepayers may be facing on this thing, is that there needs to be a lot more discussion, a lot more frank and open information on this, so that ratepayers can understand what their impending liability might be, what NorthWestern is doing how to address that, and then to see if there's a role for this commission to play in that process. But I think there needs to be a lot more transparency, and that was the reason for my comments about the blanket protective order. But I think I'm satisfied staff has looked at this very carefully and will only give protective orders where it really deserves to be. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there further discussion? Commissioner Koopman.
Now, are we at this point? Are we speaking of the Talon? Is that what this motion is on? Is the Talon protective orders?
Chairman Johnson, Commissioner Koopman, I would assume so, because the 2020 coal supply agreement would not require commission action.
Okay, yeah, and I do agree with the comments of Commissioner O'Donnell regarding that. Zach, I guess I'm becoming increasingly less convinced of concerns here. I mean, obviously, there is a place for protective orders, but I want even with regard. Let's talk, I guess, first about NERC-GADS, about the outage reports, outage data, and so forth. How do you feel that the release of that information, which could be, valuable information to release to the public with regard to the ongoing conversations and future decisions that this commission is going to make regarding Colstrip, how would the release of that really truly affect Talon? And obviously they're an independent generator; they're not regulated by us. But are there really other competitors that they would be concerned about here? Other independent merchant generators that could use this information in a detrimental way competitively to Talon, or is this sort of much ado about nothing?
Chairman Johnson, Commissioner Koopman, I'll start with a caveat. I'm not in the utility business. I don't pretend to know their business model and how folks could use this information against them. Second caveat, as much as this issue publicly is framed as a balancing test between the public's right to know and the protection of Talon's private property. It's actually just an analysis on whether there is a trade secret, because businesses in Montana do not have a right to privacy. They just have a right to protect their property. And under the due process clause and under the equal protection clause, that property right allows them to protect trade secrets. So all we're doing here is trying to figure out if there's a trade secret. And if there's a trade secret, then we protect it. And getting to the merits of your question, Talon notes that this NERC GADS information is helpful for at least two different areas. It provides the availability of the Colstrip resource. So when it's down, that's not available. And in aggregate, you get a percentage factor of how available this resource is. And then you also have a frequency, how long it is out for, and how many times it's out for throughout a year. That can be utilized to develop a proxy capacity factor, which could help other merchant generators figure out how valuable the plant is, because if it's not operating above 80%, then that lowers the value of the plant. And I'd take that on its face as saying that could provide independent economic value and could be a helpful trade secret. But again, I don't pretend to know the details. Yeah.
So whether it's a trade secret, Mr. Chairman, is partly a consideration of this balancing that we're trying to do as well. In other words, in some cases, the same information can be a trade secret. In other cases, it isn't, because the public right to know tips the scale more in favor of disclosure.
Chairman Johnson and Commissioner Koopman, I'd actually say it a bit differently. I would say every document the PSC has is a public document, and the public has the right to access it. Only if a document is subject to a trade secret, then it's protected. So our analysis is just determining whether there is a trade secret. If there is, we protect it, and we're required to do so under the due process and equal protection amendments to the U.S. and federal constitutions.
So then, Mr. Chairman, Zach, if then the staff's position is that the nature of this NERC GADS data is such that regardless of the underlying situation, and in this case, there's a real thirst out there for as much information regarding Colstrip as possible. In some other situation, there may be no public interest really expressed at all. But in both cases, it would be a trade secret. In both cases, it should be protected.
Chairman Johnson, Commissioner Koopman, yes.
Okay. And regarding the other two areas, anything further you'd like to express about that in terms of whether there is, as a practically speaking, if there really is the chance that a competitor would take advantage of that information?
Chairman Johnson, Commissioner Koopman, regarding the remediation costs, I don't have much concern because a variety of this information is publicly available at the DEQ's website. Talon is just seeking to protect a small subset of that information, and it seems reasonable that those categories of information are very helpful for third-party contractors looking to bid for these projects, and I think that merits protection. The issue that gives me the greatest pause is the budget forecast and capital expenditures, because it sounds like just a legal distinction to say it merits protection now, but it might not in the future after this transaction closes. But that distinction matters here because Talon is not a regulated utility, and they are the operator of CU4. So until NorthWestern is a majority ownership, I think it's a different analysis. But
Mr. Chairman, yes, that caused me to pause, to use your term from before, as well. and I'm inclined to agree with you. Mr. Chairman, I would move an amendment to the motion to exclude number 2 from protection in the memo. Number 2, Talon, Montana's 5-year budget forecast and 10-year capital expenditures projections, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second to the motion to amend?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there further discussion of that motion? Commissioner O'Donnell.
I would like to hear Zach's comment on this motion, whether or not you feel that that falls into the line. By the way, I really, it's very helpful, your clarification. There's a difference between privacy and property protection. That's really illuminative. So in this thing, do you consider these 5-year and 10-year projections to be protected material or potentially protected?
Chairman Johnson, Commissioner O'Donnell, yes.
Okay.
When and if this transaction is approved and at the point Northwestern becomes a majority owner, that's a different analysis. But right now, I think these budget forecasts and capital expenditures for the next 10 years, those have independent economic value, which rise to the level of being a trade secret, which, merit protection.
Thank you. I respect your judgment.
Vice Chairman Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to oppose the motion based on what Mr. Rogallo has told us. And it just makes sense. You cannot provide for the public viewing your long-term budgeting as well as your anticipated expenses, because they can be used against a company if someone is either trying to bid against them, in the sense they are a commercial generator, or if somebody has maybe an idea that they want to buy them out. Those numbers need to be kept secret until they get into it, as long as they are still in the position of an ownership of it, not after the fact when they become a third-party operator. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Rogala, the vision of Brussels sprouts and lutefisk together notwithstanding, I think, and this really is a question, not a statement, I think we're confronted again with what I like to refer to as that pesky dang thing called the law here, and it's my understanding, and this is the clarification I want, that the question put to this commission is not one of qualitative value of a trade secret, but rather whether or not a particular data set or piece of information qualifies as a trade secret. And there's a pretty bright line as to whether or not something is indeed a trade secret.
Chairman Johnson, yes and no. I apologize. There are certain things that are clearly trade secrets which warrant protection. There are some things that are not, and I think it is a facts and circumstances decision, unfortunately. Yeah.
Well, did I understand you to say, however, that with one arm behind your back, you're suggesting that the protection recommended by staff does in fact constitute protection of trade secrets at this point in time?
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you. Is there further discussion of the motion? Hearing none, call the question. All those in favor of the motion to amend the main motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No. Motion fails 4-1. Now, moving on to the main motion. Is there further discussion of the main motion? Hearing none, call the question. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries 4-1 with Commissioner Koopman dissenting. With that, we will recess until 10:30. We'll reconvene in the Commissioner Conference Room for a closed session. Thank you all very much.